Photos can capture the best and worst moments of people's lives: weddings, birthdays, reunions, and also death, disasters, and fatal accidents. Today we're going to take a look at some photos with the most disturbing backstories, from a man who got his face bitten off to a woman whose daughter was kidnapped by the cartel, leading to a 2-year revenge mission. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video will cover a range of topics that may be triggering, including violent attacks, murder, kidnapping, and lobotomies. Viewer discretion is advised. You can click the link in the description to watch a longer, uncut and ad-free version of this video, which features a whole extra entry that was unsuitable for this cut. In 2012, 31-year-old Rudy Eugene was working at a car wash in Florida. He had expressed interest in opening his own mobile car wash business following his divorce in 2008 after a 3-year marriage. His ex-wife claimed that there had been domestic violence throughout the marriage and they had no contact after the divorce. Eugene also had a pretty extensive criminal record prior to this and had been arrested 8 times since the age of 16, with the first arrest being for assault in 1997. Most of his other charges were related to marijuana, apart from one incident in February 2004, perhaps the most worrying one yet. Rudy broke a table, smashed various items in the house, pushed his mother out of the kitchen and told her, "I'll put a gun to your head and kill you." Despite his violent past, what he did on the 26th of May 2012 was nothing short of shocking. That morning, he drove to Miami Beach and spent around 30 to 40 minutes at Urban Beach Week, a popular hip-hop festival. After this, for some unknown reason, he abandoned his car, then began walking the MacArthur Causeway towards downtown Miami, discarding his driver's license and taking off his clothes and shoes along the way. By 1:55 p.m, he was totally naked when he approached 65-year-old Ronald Popper, a homeless man who had been lying underneath the Metromover viaduct. Rudy and Ronald had met a few years before when Rudy had been working for the homeless community and had given Ronald food. Whether or not Rudy recognised him on this day in 2012 is not clear though, and at first he seemed pleasant enough. Ronald later said that he was, quote, "in kind of a glad mood for a while," and, quote, "for a very short amount of time I thought he was a good guy." Then suddenly, he turned. Rudy mentioned something about not being able to score at the beach, then accused Ronald of stealing his Bible before beating him unconscious and basically biting his face off. Ronald later described the incident, quote, "He just went and turned berserk. He apparently didn't have a good day at the beach, and I guess he took it out on me or something. I don't know. He turned quite vicious after a minute or two, and he started to rip me apart. He just started to scream. And he was talking kind of funny for a while too, that I was gonna die, and he was gonna die. He must have been souped up on something. He mashed my face into the sidewalk. My face is all bent and bashed up. My eyes got plucked out. He was strangling me in wrestling holds, at the same time he was picking my eyes out." A passing cyclist witnessed the attack and called the police, and an officer showed up a few minutes later. By this time, the attack had already lasted 18 minutes though. The officer told Rudy to stop attacking Ronald, but Rudy just growled at him, then continued biting Ronald. At this point, the officer had no choice but to shoot, but after one shot, the attack still continued. The officer shot him 4 more times, which finally stopped him and killed him. Ronald was taken to hospital in critical condition, and 75 to 80% of his face above the beard was missing. His left eye had been gouged out. Thankfully, he survived, though after months of facial reconstruction surgeries, he was left permanently disfigured and blind in both eyes. The photo on screen now shows him after he had healed from the surgeries. No one really knows why Rudy suddenly went crazy this day and almost killed Ronald. There was some initial speculation that he had been high on bath salts, which were a group of synthetic recreational drugs designed to mimic effects similar to those produced by cocaine, meth, and ecstasy. The autopsy report found a number of unidentified, undigested pills. However, the toxicology report was positive only for the presence of cannabis. When police searched his abandoned car, they found the Bible that he had accused Ronald of stealing. At the time of the incident, Ronald had been estranged from his family for over 40 years, and they, including his daughter, assumed that he was dead and had likely taken his own life. Details of his life after he attended high school in the 1960s are sparse, though there are records of a string of arrests, mostly for petty crime, and hospital admissions, including one due to an incident in 1976 when he was shot by an unidentified man. An article on WPBF.com in 2014, 2 years after the so-called Causeway cannibal attack, stated that Ronald had been in a long-term medical facility ever since, and he had been allowed to stay there indefinitely. The local community raised $100,000 for him, and at this time, he had learned to dress and feed himself, shower and shave, and spent most of his time playing the guitar and listening to the radio, refusing any visitors apart from doctors and nurses. I'm glad to hear Ronald made the best recovery he could have after his horrific injuries, but this story is so terrifying. As he said, when Rudy first approached him, he was being friendly, then suddenly he turned and started attacking him. It's crazy to think that this could happen to anyone at any time without warning. The image on screen now shows a 6-year-old girl before and after a lobotomy performed by Dr. Walter Freeman, who was said to be the world's greatest proponent and pioneer of lobotomy. The caption under the first photo reads, Case 262, a 6-year-old girl whose destructive behaviour was almost intolerable in the home situation. She tore her clothes in threads. 2 lobotomies, August 24, 1944 and April 26, 1945, gave her a new start in life. The next caption reads, 8 months after standard lobotomy, she returned to her habit of smashing toys. A lobotomy is a now discredited surgery that was used for the treatment of psychiatric or neurological disorders such as depression, schizophrenia, and epilepsy. It was first developed in 1935 by Portuguese neurologist Egas Moniz, who would drill holes into a patient's skull and push a sharp instrument into the brain tissue before moving it from side to side to sever the connections between the frontal lobes and the rest of the brain. He claimed that his first 20 patients had experienced dramatic improvement, and the procedure gained popularity in the early 1940s. It was seen as revolutionary because at this time there weren't really any effective treatments for people suffering with severe mental illness. Patients often faced a lifetime of hospitalization with no hope of a cure or a somewhat normal life. The treatments that did exist then included electroconvulsive therapy and insulin shock therapy, but they had limited success. Despite the purported success stories, the lobotomy was controversial even in the early days. While some patients experienced a reduction in symptoms, others suffered severe personality changes, cognitive impairment, brain damage, seizures, and even death. Following the surgery, many patients were incontinent and their personalities and cognitive function changed dramatically. Spontaneity, responsiveness, self-awareness, and self-control were often significantly reduced. In 1936, Walter Freeman was working at a hospital in Washington, D.C., where he claimed to have witnessed, quote, the waste of manpower and womanpower. Determined to help patients get out of the hospital and increase efficiency, he became fascinated with the lobotomy and modified the procedure with his neurosurgeon partner James Watts, who performed the first ever prefrontal lobotomy in the US. By 1942, they had lobotomized more than 200 patients and reported that 63% had improved, 24% saw no change, and 14% became worse. However, there were various horror stories. In 1941, they lobotomized Rosemary Kennedy, sister of former US President John F. Kennedy, and the results were disastrous. As a child, she had reportedly shown signs of developmental delays, and by the age of 22, she was said to be becoming increasingly irritable and difficult. She would frequently experience convulsions and would have violent episodes where she would attack others. So when she was 23, her father decided to have her lobotomized without telling her mother. James Watts made the incision, then put an instrument into her brain while Walter asked Rosemary questions, such as to sing God Bless America or to count backwards. They said they made an estimate on how far to cut based on how she responded, and when she began to become incoherent, they stopped. They went too far though, and Rosemary was left unable to walk or speak intelligibly, and it was said that her mental capacity had diminished to that of a 2-year-old child. She spent years in a psychiatric hospital until 1949, when she was relocated to St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children, and this is where she lived for the rest of her life. Her mother didn't visit her for 20 years, and her father never visited her at all. Her parents covered up what happened to her, and even her siblings had no idea where she was. Her father had a stroke in 1961, which left him unable to speak and walk. And not that I'd ever wish that on someone, but it almost feels like poetic justice after what he did to Rosemary before abandoning her and pretending she didn't exist. He died in 1969, at which point the rest of the family began gradually involving her in family life again. She eventually died of natural causes in January 2005 at the age of 86, at which time she'd learned to walk again with a limp, but she never regained the ability to speak clearly. As for Walter's version of the lobotomy, in 1945 he had heard about an Italian doctor who had accessed the brain through the eye sockets, and this inspired him to begin experimenting with a new way of doing the lobotomy. The following year, he performed the first transorbital lobotomy on a 29-year-old housewife. The procedure involved steel instruments resembling ice picks that were hammered into the brain through the bones at the back of the eye sockets. This was a much quicker way of doing a lobotomy, and patients didn't need anesthesia. They were just made unconscious before with a portable electroshock machine. While lobotomies were initially seen as a last resort for patients with the most severe conditions who had not responded to other treatments, Walter began promoting his version almost as some kind of magical cure-all for everything from severe depression and schizophrenia to indigestion and minor behavioural difficulties. While he himself conducted lobotomies on 3,500 patients, the youngest of whom was just 4 years old, he promoted the surgery to other professionals in the mental health field, including psychiatrists who had no surgical training. He is quoted as saying, "This is not a time-consuming operation. A competent team in a well-organised mental hospital can do 4 such operations in 2 to 2.5 hours. The actual bilateral prefrontal lusotomy can be done by a properly trained neurosurgeon in 6 minutes and seldom takes more than 10 minutes. Walter would take photos of his patients before and after to prove the procedure had worked. You can see on screen now his case number 121, a woman he described as forever fighting, the meanest woman, before the operation. Then under the photo 11 days after the lobotomy, he noted that she giggles a lot. He also began performing the lobotomy as a palliative procedure. Case 490 was a patient in 1947 who was in agonizing pain and respiratory distress due to cancer of the larynx. 5 days after surgery, Walter noted that the cancer was advancing, but the patient's distress had cleared up. He died 1 month later. In the mid-1950s, lobotomies began decreasing in popularity with the introduction of antipsychotic medication. Walter continued performing the procedure though, even after his long-term partner James Watts began expressing disapproval of lobotomies in 1950. In 1967, Walter operated on Helen Mortensen, who had already had 2 lobotomies done by him. She died from a brain hemorrhage shortly after, and this resulted in Walter being banned from operating. He died from cancer 5 years later at the age of 76. While Walter had initially claimed to have a success rate of 85%, it was discovered that there was a 15% fatality rate, meaning he presumably classed every patient he didn't kill as a success. When doctors investigated the long-term outcomes for his patients, only 1/3 could be said to have experienced some improvement, while another third was significantly worse off. This photo shows 19-year-old Judith Dull shortly before she was murdered by Harvey Glattman, also known as the Glamour Girl Slayer. He lured Judith and his other victims in by posing as a professional photographer and promising them work. One day in 1957, Judith accepted an invite to Harvey's home, where he tied her up and gagged her under the guise of taking photos for a crime fiction magazine. Little did she know that she was about to become a real victim. Harvey was born in 1927 and he began displaying antisocial and sadomasochistic tendencies from a young age. After he developed some concerning, inappropriate habits, his mother took him to the doctor, who believed he would grow out of it, but he didn't. In his teenage years, he began breaking into women's apartments to steal their belongings, including lingerie and even a handgun one time. He soon got bored of just stealing things and eventually started stalking, tying women up at gunpoint and essaying them. He was arrested at the age of 17 and his mother bailed him out. While awaiting trial, he abducted another woman and essayed her too. He was eventually convicted of kidnapping an SA and sentenced to 1 to 5 years in prison, though he only ended up serving 8 months. After his incarceration, it didn't take long for him to start committing crimes again. He threatened a young couple with a toy gun, tied them up, and essayed the woman. The man managed to free himself and lunged at Harvey, who slashed his shoulders with a pocket knife before fleeing the scene. A few days later, he mugged a young nurse after threatening her with the toy gun and was about to essay her too until she screamed and scared him off. He mugged another 2 women the following day and shortly after was caught by police. This time he was sentenced to 5 to 10 years, though got out on parole after 3 years, despite being diagnosed as a psychopathic personality schizophrenic type. He moved back in with his mother and spent the next 5 years working odd jobs, checking in with his parole officer, and seemingly staying out of trouble. But as soon as his supervision was done, he moved to Los Angeles to continue his crimes, only this time he took it up a notch. Using the pseudonym Johnny Glenn, Harvey approached Judith Dull and asked her to pose for him for $20 an hour. He bound and gagged her and told her to look scared as if she were about to be SA'd. He took a few photos, then suddenly his demeanour changed. He pulled out a gun, a real one this time, and told her he wouldn't hurt her if she did as she was told. With no other option, she followed his orders of taking her clothes off, then he proceeded to SA her multiple times. Unlike his previous victims though, he had no intention of letting this one go. He drove her out to the desert, strangled her, took photos of her corpse, then left the scene. A few months later, he arranged a date with a 30-year-old woman named Shirley Ann Bridgeford after seeing her Lonely Hearts ad in a newspaper. He posed as a plumber named George Williams, and when he picked her up, he told her he'd take her on a drive through the countryside instead of going dancing as they'd originally planned. When he arrived at a remote spot off the highway, he pulled out his gun and SA'd her twice before driving out to the desert, where he tied her up and took photos of her, then killed her. In In July 1958, Harvey saw a classified ad in the local newspaper featuring a 24-year-old woman named Rose Mercado who was looking for work as a model. This time using the pseudonym Frank Wilson, Harvey met Rose in her apartment and they agreed on a price for the photography. He left, telling her he'd be in touch, but the following night he broke into her apartment, SA'd her, then drove her to the desert to meet the same fate as his last two victims had. A few months later, Harvey attempted to assault another couple, but this time he was caught in the act. A police officer was driving on the freeway when he found Harvey wrestling with a 28-year-old woman named Lorraine Vigil, who had fought back and managed to take Harvey's gun as he was attempting to kidnap her. Harvey was arrested and he confessed to everything. When police searched his home, they found a toolbox containing all the photos he'd taken of his victims. He was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death on the 18th of September 1959. He seemingly accepted his fate, and some of his last words were, "It's better this way." This is one of the last photos taken of Karen Rodriguez with her mother Miriam shortly before she was kidnapped by the Zetas cartel in January 2014. Karen was 20 years old at the time and had 2 older siblings. At the time in San Fernando, Mexico, kidnappings by the cartel were so common that banks began offering loans to pay the ransoms. Miriam received a call one morning, as many parents before her had, telling her the Zetas demands in order for her daughter to be returned. The man on the other end handed the phone to Karen to prove she was still alive. Karen's father, Luis, had received an almost identical call earlier that morning. The family believed that if they paid the ransom, Karen would be sent home, and so Luis went to the bank for a loan. With this money and the family's life savings, they had just under $10,000. Luis had been told to bring the money in a bag to the health centre, where someone would meet him to collect the cash and tell him where to pick Karen up from. After a 2-hour wait, a teenager arrived at the health centre, took the bag, and told Luis to go to the cemetery in 20 minutes to meet Karen. Luis and Miriam went to the cemetery and waited. They waited until nightfall, but no one came. A couple of days later, Miriam was driving through the city when she noticed a car following her. It pulled up in front of her and 2 men jumped out, asking if she was Karen's mum. They told her to meet them at a nearby restaurant in 10 minutes, alone, so she did. Here, they told her they needed another $1,600 to return Karen. It wasn't their call, they said, but with that money, they could make sure the right people said yes. With few other options, she agreed, but still, Karen never came home. 1 month after the disappearance, Miriam forced herself to accept that Karen was gone forever, and in this moment, she vowed to find whoever was responsible and make them pay. While the stakes were much higher this time, Miriam was no stranger to taking revenge into her own hands. In 1989, she had tracked down a group of thieves who had raided her husband's safe and recovered all the missing items. Another time, she had intervened when her daughter Azalea's husband had been threatened by gangs. Miriam dedicated the next 2 years of her life to hunting down Karen's kidnappers. She used various disguises and fake IDs and set traps to help apprehend all 11 cartel members who had been involved. By March 2016, 4 of the abductors were in prison awaiting trial and another 6 had been killed in raids by the Marines. Miriam had actually accompanied the Marines on some of these raids, the first of which resulted in the deaths of 4 cartel members, and when they entered the building, they found a number of kidnapping victims who were still alive. One of them said that a female Zeta was preparing to behead him when the raid began, so thanks to Miriam, he and the others were still alive. Miriam wandered through the site, searching for any sign of Karen, and eventually found a stack of items, including a scarf and a seat cushion, which she instantly recognized as belonging to Karen. In 2015, after a tip-off from a local, she finally learned that her daughter was dead and that her remains had been buried on a remote, abandoned ranch. She went there and found a bone that was later identified as part of Karen's femur. Miriam had assumed her daughter was dead, but the confirmation was like a knife in the heart. Still, this only fueled her more to continue her crusade for justice. In March 2016, she tracked down the final Zeta member she had reason to believe had been involved, a man known only as the Florist. When she spotted him in the street, he recognized her and tried to run away, but she caught up to him and tackled him, holding a gun to his throat and threatening to kill him if he moved. Just over a year later, on the 10th of May 2017, Mother's Day, Miriam left work and drove home. She was on crutches after breaking her foot chasing someone with connection to the Zetas. As she struggled to get out of her car, two armed men got out of a truck parked nearby and fired 13 rounds at her, hitting her 8 times. Her son, Louis Hector, heard the gunshots and came running outside, but Miriam was already unconscious, her hand inside her purse where she kept her gun. She was taken to hospital but died of her injuries a few hours later. She was 57 years old. Miriam was nothing short of a hero. She knew the risks when she decided to hunt down those cartel members, and she did it anyway to avenge her daughter and with hopes of saving other victims. And she succeeded. If she never tipped off the Marines and accompanied them on that raid, those victims would have almost certainly died. Not to mention the amount of people she likely saved in the future by capturing various cartel members herself. Miriam's death was absolutely tragic, as was her daughter's, but I hope she at least went out satisfied. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any topics you might like me to cover in the future. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new video.